today's outcomes, we're really just trying to share an understanding of the student-centered redesign process and transfer, and how it can be really structured to support what you need at your own institution for diverse student populations. We're hoping to share a strategy that can really hopefully strengthen your program infrastructure. The empathy interview hopefully will be able to better foster student engagement at your institution, and maybe also provide some opportunities for cross-sector partnerships. And after that, we'll have breakout rooms where we're really just trying to foster ideas and strategies that you can apply when you go back to your own work. And with that, I'll pass it over to Adam.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning again, everyone. Excited for this conversation. We've worked for a number of years on transfer on transfer issues, and we'll get to that in a second. I especially really enjoy the communities of practice, excuse me, that K-16 puts on. It's usually, 15 to 25 folks from across the county who get to not just hear what's going on, but really engage in activities, as Andrew pointed out, and get a feel for the work. So we're excited that you're here with us to get a feel for that work, to go through the process. I'll go through a bit of the history of our work in K-16, how we came to this redesign process. We are waiting on some of our co-facilitators from Wested who helped design this work for us, with us rather. I'm hoping everything is okay. If they don't get on in the next few minutes, I will take over some of their work and help go through design with y'all. But in the meantime, let's talk a bit about the transfer redesign process, how United Lake and the K-16 Collaborative came to focus on transfer, and what we've been doing since. So, Andrew, next slide, please. So in 2019, United LA, in partnership with Wested, started working with a number of our local 4-year and 2-year colleges in the county. We were able to secure data from 16 community colleges and 4 of our LA area CSUs, really to understand first the effectiveness of the associate degree for transfer program, and then second, as transfer generally. The goal around this was that the ADT, which at that point had been running for 7 or 8 years, was yielding some interesting partnerships across the state, was yielding some really great, well-designed curriculums for students, but they weren't necessarily yielding the numbers that were supporting students. So we wanted to see why that was and better understand how we can move forward with that. The data, as you can imagine, we'll go through a bit of the data in our next portion, unveiled barriers in the ADT and traditional transfer pathways. We saw them hindering students' ability to transfer from one institution to another, and really created a lack of coherence in the transfer experience for students. As we go into the data, you'll see a bit of why, but really we took that and we wanted to do something about it. Next slide, please. So doing something about it, that is, of course, what we try to do as conveners. The first go around for it was trying to form a community of practice. Not one unlike this, I would say, where we have a small group of folks from across the region looking at the data, looking at root causes of what's causing barriers, and then really trying to develop new ideas and new plans to solve for some of those barriers. The COP yielded really interesting ideas on how to solve for transfer and solve for AT problems. We looked at credit mobility and pathway planning. It ran for almost a year, and it yielded really 2 key findings that have driven our work ever since. The first, community partners and community college and CSU partners, despite working within articulation agreements or working with the same students that feed from one college to another, really don't have many interactions with one another. And there are, of course, many reasons for that. Our segments of higher education are not necessarily built to work with each other on granular level. But because of that, we were noticing that our campuses just weren't, our campus practitioners, those that were working on transfer day to day, those who were serving the students, just didn't have a sense of what was going on on the other campus, which was causing huge problems for student success. The second, like state transfer policy, campus-based practices were not necessarily student-centered. Many of the practices that we saw, not just across the state, but on our campuses, were maybe outdated. They're working on old MOUs, old articulation agreements that didn't necessarily reflect current students, current needs, current degrees. The policies didn't necessarily reflect the large number of students trying to transfer or the impaction of campuses that we see across LA. This really caused a need for us to identify what those practices on campus were that were challenging students in transfer success, and really working toward what changes need to be made in order to affect change. Next slide, please. That for us yielded this student-centered transfer redesign process. And we were very fortunate to be able to work with WestEd on taking a human-centered design, building upon a human-centered design framework and applying it to transfer-specific and student-centered activities across campuses. We piloted this work with Dominguez Hills and Cal Poly Pomona. We have a great report on that I'll share in a little bit. That is really phenomenal. It lays out really the rationale, the partnerships, the cause, some of the changes that have occurred, and really why it's important to do this. And then, of course, we'll talk a bit more about that and go through some of the activities that led to that. But really, in these cross-campus groups, all the participants that were across the spectrum of campus life. You had your associate vice presidents over admissions, academic affairs, student affairs. You had deans of colleges working on academic pathways for transfer students. We had really fantastic participation from student affairs folks in EOPS or other affinity programming. And it was a really phenomenal way to, in a cross-campus way, review data and practices, talk to students about their experiences, and really look at that from an empathetic view, assess resources for those students, and assess curriculum and transfer pathways and degrees. It wasn't easy by any means. The process is it's hard to look at yourself, as we all know, and it's hard to admit that there's a problem sometimes. It's also hard to look at each other and say, hey, the problem isn't with you, it's with me, or hey, the problem is with you and not with me, which can be just as hard. So really going through this process where we took a very analytical view, we looked at that data, we talked to students in a more empathetic view, and laid everything out on the table. And we got rid of ego, we got rid of the barriers that we built up in ourselves and our own work. And across these two campus communities, we were really able to see what the opportunities were, what the challenges were, and how to work past them. It was a lot of fun to do it with both these groups, I'll say. And then the final slide on that before I turn it over to our colleague Alex to go a bit about the design of the work. Our student-centered transfer redesign, in the facilitated sessions, like I said, we identified challenges, ideated solutions, prototyped, refined, and launched them. The process, which, gosh, takes about 6 months of planning and then about 3 months of actually doing, right? So the most of a year to work through this process with our campus partners really yielded phenomenal prototypes grounded in both data and student experience. Our partners went to students, went to colleagues to better understand what could change, what should change, how they could change. And then, as you'll hear from our campus partners that participated, and I'm really excited for them to share, because we had some sessions earlier this week just to prep for this, and I was learning things that were happening, which really made me very happy. What was launched has yielded some really great trends for not just students, but campuses themselves. It's kind of changed the dynamics on campus, which are just crucially important, not just for transfer, but for so many other fields on campus or student-centered activities. So with that, you'll hear more about it from them, which I'm excited to share. First, we're going to send it to our colleague Alex, who's going to go a bit into design thinking to help ground you all in what the process was before you hear about how it went. Alex.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam, and thank you all so much for having me. Let me first ask, how many folks, just by a raise of hands, are familiar with design thinking or human-centered design? Okay. Excellent. So a few folks are familiar and some folks brand new. I love that mix. I love that mix. So I will welcome those of you who've participated to share your thoughts and experiences in the chat as well, and we'll have time to unmute and talk. But for those who are new, that is exciting to get to share a little bit about what this process is all about. So design thinking, human-centered design, these are a creative problem-solving activities and mindsets that help bring people together to think through complex, challenging problems and to address them collaboratively and innovatively with the person that you're working to serve right at the center. Design thinking, and much of what I will talk about today, is borrowed from Stanford's D School design thinking methods, as well as from IDEO's human-centered design and LUBA's human-centered design activity. So we sort of brought together a lot of different methods to apply to the context of transfer at our local community and colleges and CSUs. So if we're going to talk about design thinking, we have to talk about, first of all, what is design? We think of design in a lot of different places and ways. So we can click through here. There's interior design, policy, product design, system design, website, fashion design, a whole range of ways that where design shows up. I think the most helpful way to think about design, in my mind, is that it is the creation of something with an intended use or effect. Sort of that is kind of the big picture when we think of it that way. And if we think about that way, what actually can come to mind is the many, many, many examples of bad design that we deal with in our everyday lives. So this, I believe, as a shout out to LA folks, is LAX. And challenges of sort of that being a good design once upon a time, but it's certainly not, I think, easy to navigate or deal with for most folks these days. Next slide. There's also bad design that makes sort of an intended object hard to use. So you see the carpet on the stairs that actually makes it really hard to tell where the stairs are. I love this mug because I have a cat mug that has the intended effect. So cute until it is poking your eyes and thus rends it almost unusable. I actually have my cat mug for this exact, and it is at home, but I meant to bring it in the office because I can't even use it at home. So I'll have to remember that for next time. But next slide. We have bad design where it just is not for intended use or really didn't become the fad that folks might have expected. So this is Google Glass, if I think most of us maybe hasn't even seen this, but it was this idea that you could have a little computer in your glasses, and that certainly did not take off, and certainly looks pretty silly as well. Next slide. This is probably one of my favorite examples of bad design because it is what a Norman door is what it's called. So it's this idea that with this door, looking at it, you don't know whether it's a push or a pull. You don't know how to open the door. And I imagine all of us have been in a place where you reach for a door, you reach the wrong way, and you can't get in, and likely have caused someone else to chuckle at you. And when you think about design, and as something as simple as a door, that a door in itself may need a sign to tell you which way and how to operate it, just shows how hard it can be to design things in a usable, intuitive way. And that brings us to our next slide, which is sort of as we think about how our post-secondary and higher ed systems are designed. So our system is designed in a way where we admit students to college, we watch half of them not graduate, and then we blame the students. And so this is where we get that, and I think a saying that I imagine folks have heard before of this idea of every system is perfectly creates the outcomes that it's designed to create. And so when we see things and we are operating in systems where we, as an example, admit students to college and then have students not graduate, that is an example of bad design. It's not the student's fault. It's something in the design of how we're operating our systems that isn't working. And so this is the opportunity for us to get and look at that design and think about what we could change in that design so that it is producing our intended outcomes. And I think if we bring this into the context of LA, we really see that our education equity gap is evidence of the bad design that exists in our education and workforce systems. So we know post-secondary education and training is key to economic mobility for LA County's low-income students of color. And excuse me, while nearly 3 out of 4 K-12 students in LA County are Black or Latinx, we are failing to provide them with the robust pathways into high-growth careers. And we know that only 59% of Black and 55% of Latinx high school student graduate matriculated to higher education compared to 72% of their white peers. That is indication, that is evidence of bad design and something that we need to address. Meanwhile, 46% of Black and 52% of Latinx first-time CSU students in the LA region earned a bachelor's degree within 6 years, compared to 71% of white students. So again, we're seeing evidence of bad design, something that we want to focus in on and address. Next slide, okay. And that is so key because by 2027, approximately 70% of jobs will require a college credential. And we know that the current poorly designed systems are creating income disparities for people of color in LA County, where we see that the median household income of Black residents is $52,000, Latinx residents is $61,000, while white residents is $92,000. Again, we are seeing evidence of bad design here that we want to address. And then we also see that if we focus in on the topic of this conversation today for transfer in particular. So we West Ed partner with United LA to do a report looking at the transfer pathways and transfer outcomes for students at 16 community colleges in the LA region and 4 CSUs. And in that report, we found that of students who exited those community colleges, only 5% transferred to CSUDH, CSULA, CSUN, and CPP within 3 years. And Black or African American students and students over the age of 30 were less likely to transfer than other groups. So we're seeing, again, disparities there. This is evidence of the bad design that exists in our transfer system and outcomes that are persisting despite an incredible amount of work and good intention and effort by the part of practitioners and administrators and faculty at all of these campuses. So that indicates a need to look at this problem differently and to approach it in new and innovative ways. And yeah, we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Andrew. And so that's where design thinking comes in. So design thinking is a series of mindsets and activities to help us solve complex problems. There's sort of 5 key phases: empathy, define. So empathy, really working to understand those you're working to serve, defining a specific problem, ideating or brainstorming solutions to that problem, prototyping or designing sort of rough versions of your solutions to then test it, learn, and before sort of putting something into place. And so this was the process that we brought to groups at CPP and CSUDH to think about how they might serve transfer students and improve transfer student outcomes on their campuses better. Okay. So just briefly, I want to highlight a few of the mindsets that are so key to design thinking. So the first is around empathy and this idea of focusing on humans. So it's the idea of when we put people we're trying to serve at the center of our work, we can create real solutions. So often we will start at a place that is sort of what is true for our world or our work. We'll start at kind of an administrative or really high level of problems. And so what design thinking does is it brings us to focus on the student first and foremost. So we're thinking about the problem from their lens and what's really going to matter to them, what their value is. When we start that way, it can unlock our thinking to think about different ways and to design more effective solutions. Okay, next. Okay. So emotions are a superpower is the other thing to know, so that when we learn about what people feel and what they care about, we unlock new possibilities. And we see an example here. This is, I think, an MRI machine in a children's hospital, which was designed in an effort to really make the experience better for young kids who are having to go through this scary medical procedure. And in the way that they approached and used empathy is rather than sort of taking a technical approach, they talk to students or they talk to kids and they ask them sort of what their experiences has been getting their health care, how do they feel, what are they missing out on? And they heard from these young kids with dealing with illnesses that they really felt like they were missing out on other things that kids their age were experiencing, like going to camp on trips. And so in redesigning this MRI machine, rather than, again, trying to make it less loud or take a technical approach, they designed the room with a spirit of adventure so that they could bring that spirit of adventure to students. And so it's that idea that if we're really starting with what people care about, we might think about a problem and solutions differently. When we define a problem, it's about really understanding and identifying a single problem and being ready to reframe your understanding of the problem with a beginner's mindset. So again, rather than thinking about a problem as a technical one, changing and sort of taking a more holistic approach. Next is ideate. This is one of my favorites is as we think about brainstorming and ideation, we're ready to switch between flaring and getting lots and lots of ideas and focusing in. Okay, and next. And then for prototyping, the key mindset there is building to think so that we are creating quickly and getting feedback often. And we're creating rough beta versions to understand what's needed. And that we're really embracing this mindset of failing forward, that we can understand what does and doesn't work before investing resources. So often, if we're thinking of a new idea, we want it to be perfect before we share it out. But that can really get us invested in the idea before we actually know if it's what people need or if it's going to work. So if we can be really rough with what it is that we're sharing with people, that creates opportunities for feedback and improvement much earlier on. And that's where testing comes in as well. So, okay, that is your very quick, lightning fast overview of design thinking. And now you're going to get to hear it about what this was like in practice from your colleagues at CPP and CSUDH. So I will pass things back to Andrew, maybe, or Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. That was an awesome overview of what we went through. And as Alex mentioned, now joining us, we have Dr. Dora Lee from Cal Poly Pomona and transfer specialist Miss Jennifer Mancaros from Cal State Dominguez Hills. We're very excited to have them both join us in conversation and share a little bit about their experience. Thank you to you both for being here with us today. We can get right into it. I'll pass this one over first to Dr. Lee. The redesign process really emphasized shifting organizational culture, as Alex highlighted, not just policies. It's really trying to understand cultural and mindset shifts. And so, what have you seen on your own campuses in terms of those mindset and cultural shifts that staff can help carry forward.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar. So I personally enjoy this experience a lot because it had us really think about what are we doing? We call ourselves transfer receptive, but what is truly transfer receptive, right? It's like we throw around these words, but we never really sit down and operationalize it and take a look at what we're doing as an institution. So I think the process gave us the opportunity to sit together with different folks that I think Alex talked about, right? And even Adam, like we brought together a lot of folks that we typically didn't even work with, from institutional research to student affairs, the deans, enrollment services, our frontline folks, advisors and counselors, along with our community college partner, which was Mount SAC. We actually also invited the others too that also joined us periodically, but it just brought us to the table to talk about what are some of the challenges that we experience, what our students needed. I think we'll talk about the empathy exercise later on, which really made a huge impact on our thinking. And at the end of the day, we kind of like, you know, talked about, okay, this is what's going on and what do we do together? And I think our biggest takeaway was really, you know, we need to collaborate, we need to communicate and co-create. I think we're so good at looking at a problem and then coming up with a solution in a silo, right? I'm in my little office and I'm going to come up with a magical plan to save the world. But I haven't even talked to the people it's impacting or my partners because we can't do it alone. Um, I don't know if y'all are familiar with Cal Poly Pomona. We have a program called Poly Transfer, and Poly Transfer is run by one person and me, and they share me with 10 other areas. And so, if you think about it, can really Poly Transfer, you know, save the entire transfer community at Cal Poly Pomona? They do their best and they do a great job, but guess what? We need to bring everyone. So it's our responsibility as an institution to play different roles and come together and talk about what roles we play, how can we support each other, and how do we carry out these initiatives, right? I mean, because we're always coming up with new things. So we just need partners to talk and solve together. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Yeah, that spirit of collaboration is really important. And similar question to you, Ms. Mancaros. Have you noticed any type of cultural or mindset shifts in frontline staff as you went through this process and as you work through transfer now?
Yeah, and thank you again for letting me be part of the webinar as well. We've definitely seen a huge cultural shift here at Dominguez Hills, mainly because we didn't really have a transfer receptive culture. We had something, but it was something that was kind of put off to the side because we focused mainly on our first year students. But we really started to think of how can we start thinking and serving our transfer students collectively. You know, across multiple divisions, we really kind of were working in silos, but we weren't really working together with purpose. And so everyone was doing all this, you know, we all do great work, but it wasn't connected. And so, you know, here at Dominguez Hills, with this process, we found that there's a true sense of shared responsibility in our transfer students and their experiences here. And so it's not just a one, you know, job for one office. It's actually a sort of a collective collaborative effort to ensure that we are being committed through our staff, our faculty, and even our students. I also feel that a big part of that shift was we centered more on the empathy and student voices. Thinking back to the empathy interviews that we had, you know, we really started looking at why do we ask questions like, why didn't the student do that? But rather asked, you know, what barriers might the student be facing? And so that simple sort of change kind of really gave us a better perspective of how we need to reshape transfer student design processes here and how we communicate with them. Our frontline staff, faculty, and students, they are the true advocates, you know, so we're not just asking questions or doing surveys, we're actually having, you know, we have talk with the transfer or tea with the transfer that specialist, that's what it's called, where a student, I put a a table out on the walkway and they can come up to me and tell me some of the challenges they're facing or so forth. So we've definitely seen that just being out there and listening and starting that conversation has now put sort of our vision or our ideas into practice. And transfer learning community is the biggest impact or transformation we did. That community is housed with staff, faculty, programs, and departments, as well as our students, where we really just come together and talk about our ideas, collaborate, co-work on different designs and processes to help students kind of have that experience from entry to graduation. Again, I'm going to agree with Dr. Dorley when she said that collaboration is a key. I also think that even empathy and belonging, as well as having a strong, staff on the front line, can really carry sort of the initiatives and things that we're putting on every day for the success of our students.
That's incredible. And I'd like to stay with you for a moment. You mentioned the empathy interviews that I know we'll touch on in a little bit, but you also mentioned that students often spoke of the need for belonging and support on campus. And could you share just a little bit about how you've integrated maybe some of the feedback from the students into some of your practices or your processes? I know you mentioned you're already out there tabling and providing more of that accessibility, but is there anything else that you would recommend?
Yeah, definitely through those empathy interviews, as well as additional efforts we did, while working with Unite LA, I realized that beyond that, we really need to get out there. And I think one of the ideas that stemmed from working with you guys was going out and tabling and having those conversations with students to just come up and ask a question. But that led to more focused student groups. I ended up kind of branching out, asking students, what do you want to see on campus? What do you think we're missing? And again, they all felt like there was a sense of isolation, right? And invisibility. Where's the transfer community on campus? We don't necessarily have a transfer center. My office is the transfer center. So they don't really have a place to really identify. So with these conversations, students decided, well, we're going to advocate for ourselves and we want you to assist us. And so they ended up coming to these transfer learning communities and talking about, how they wanted to create a student organization that focuses on supporting transfer students and now even returning transfer students, to kind of give them that platform and that community that they want. And that has really been significant. It's called STARS. It's the Supporting Transfer and Returning Students organization. And they're really just about advocacy, working with our staff and faculty. And they're really creating a voice on campus now. I've really seen that our AVPs and our president is taking notice to the work that they're doing on campus. And I think that kind of resonates with just our whole cultural shift, right? We're not just focusing on our first years, we're kind of putting in a little bit more effort to our transfer students because they want, to feel like they belong here, and they do belong here. That's sort of our mantra in our community. You belong here, here's why. And so I think with those sort of initiatives outside of, we have our 3 and 2 Scholars Program, and then we have our Tau Sigma Honor Society. That organization has really just changed the way our community of, our frontline people have really looked at, wow, these students really want to kind of set that foundation for them. And I think that's been our biggest success with that.
That's really incredible. I know folks will want to reach out to y'all at Dominguez Hills to talk about this later on. So thank you for sharing all of those examples of how you're really integrating student feedback. And passing it back to you now, Dr. Lee, this type of work really involves momentum and really trying to sustain that momentum. And sometimes sustaining momentum after this process can be a challenge, especially in this type of work, especially with some of the issues that you've already mentioned. So how do you feel like your campus can keep ideas that you took from the redesign process and how can you integrate them without them stalling out and make sure that they move into real practice?
That's a great question. And I love Jennifer's idea of the whole learning community, and I'm thinking I need to take that and bring it back, because I think we had some amazing momentum when Unite LA was with us for the experience. We were at a high, right? We were like, yeah, let's do this. And we came up with our prototype, and we were moving ahead. And yeah, I mean, at some point, some things just kind of caught up with us, and we started going along our merry way again, right? It's like we all have our day jobs, and these new aspirations eventually start waning, because we are just trying to get things done, right? And so I think for us, we need a constant reminder of like, hey, let's get this going again. And so, I've been really thinking about this, especially when this report came out. I'm like, we've been doing the work, and again, more pockets, like I would say, the work around credit loss, and creating more pathways, especially for those programs that don't have an ADT. So we've been working a lot with our engineering faculty in just designing pathways for our engineers at the community colleges. I mean, we've been making a lot of progress, but I think, again, reporting out to the larger community about our progress is something that we could definitely improve on. So like, we signed a campus-wide MOU with Mount SAC. So how many people knew about that, right? Aside from the people who signed or attended the celebration, it's something pretty big. We even signed a smaller one with the College of Engineering. And so we have the momentum, but I think sharing out that momentum is also important, because there were other people that were part of this transfer redesign that could really be part of the celebration, right? So I think having, learning communities or a continued advisory board, that was something that was also part of our prototype that we didn't choose. We had so many ideas, right? But at the end of the day, we had to pick one or two tangible ones. But one of them was to create a learning community type, or a working group that comes together regularly to talk about progress, activities, and to celebrate. So I'm so glad that we're having this and the report came out, because in my mind, I just wrote to myself on the side, send work group from Transfer Redesign the report that came out along with our prototype that we came up with, so that it will remind us like, oh my gosh, we need to get together again to start the work, or just even connect.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, really getting folks back into the room to do the work again. Thank you, Dr. Lee. And similar question to you, Ms. Mancaros. Dr. Lee's kind of already touched on it, but what role do you see in terms of cross-campus collaboration and with community colleges, advising teams, or faculty that could really help sustain momentum in this type of transfer redesign work and in strengthening transfer pathway?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely, we've learned through this process that, building sort of that transfer receptive culture takes a shared ecosystem, not just isolated sort of programs. So, through our transfer learning community, I just wanted to touch base on this. This community is sort of like a fluid community. Like when we need certain people on the community, we'll reach out to them. So not everyone stays within that community. I think what's great about having that on campus or having it here at DH is that we're able to really bring in people we need at times where we're working on certain projects. And then if anyone's interested, they're more than welcome to be part of that conversation. So, by bringing those sort of advisors, faculty, even our outside externally, at community colleges, we really want to engage them and let them know, hey, this is what we're working on for our students. Is there any input you want to give to us? Is there anything we can do on our end to support you and your students through that transition? So we've definitely tried to work closely to ensure students have that consistency, have accurate information about our transfer requirements, about our associate degree for transfer sort of requirements, and just to kind of also identify any barriers that they see from their end, that we can maybe work on, like co-creating some solutions to help that transition or experience be better for the student. I think overall, like, we've kind of shifted from thinking of transfer as sort of a handoff to seeing it as what we call the continuity of care. So the one that starts in the community college, but then, continues through graduation here at Dominguez Hills. And so that sort of shared student-centered approach is truly what's kind of strengthened our transfer ecosystem. Along the sides of me, making the effort to let community colleges know that DH has been hiding me as their secret transfer specialist ninja under the radar. But I'm starting to establish those relationships within community colleges, because I think it's important that they are part of this community, part of the conversation, and part of the way we redesign how our transfer receptive culture is promoted here at Dominguez Hills.
Yep, thank you, Ms. Banqueros. I think that makes a lot of sense looking forward to the future. And Dr. Lee, looking ahead, what resources, policies, or supports do you think are most critical to kind of improve and scale these transfer redesign processes, both at Cal Poly Pomona and in your partnership with Mount SAC, and just moving forward across the region?
I think we need to continue building partnerships. Just because you made a friend doesn't mean you could just set them aside and go back to them when you need them. It takes time to cultivate these relationships and maintain and commit to what we promised. Now that we have an MOU doesn't mean that we could just now magically go along our way. So I think that sustained momentum is important. Continue to have regular meetings with our partners and with our senior leadership. Continue to work with regional collaboratives. And so that's something we have maintained, in the IE and in the LA region. Just really share our experience with other institutions. We hope to, let other folks know about some of the pilots that we've been doing here, and in hopes that other CSUs and community colleges can, take a look at and try to pilot in their areas. We've been able to do a lot of amazing work, and we piloted a lot of different things with the support of our community partners and grants. And so we're at a point right now where we need to start institutionalizing. And so that's going to be, a larger conversation with our senior leadership, because these things require money, right? So without money, it's really hard to sustain. I mean, I know it's like a bad word, but we need to be real about our resources, our human resources too. We could come up with some amazing projects and initiatives, all those fancy words, but at the end of the day, we need to talk about who does it and how do we fund it. So I think also making sure that we are accountable to the people that we are committing ourselves to, whether there are our funders, our stakeholders, so that we can show proof of concept, right? So I think continuing to look at data, continue to talk to students, so that we can show that the work that we're doing has been effective and impactful. So that's really where we are too at the same time. So it's a constant, like I see it as like a cyclical thing where, we come up with ideas and prototypes, and then, then we test it out, and then, you have to show proof of concept, and you continue again, right? And so yeah, I mean, it's a constant thing. There's no stopping. You have to continue to go back. It's continuous improvement, right? We go and talk to students. Well, what was it like? Did you even enjoy it? Was it impactful? Because if they don't share their experience with us, then we'll assume that everything is great, and we'll continue doing all the bad stuff that we're doing or the great stuff we're doing, right?
Definitely. And in that vein, if you could give like one piece of advice to institutions and programs that are just really starting to get into this redesign work today on transfer, and really just starting to think about supporting their students, what is one piece of advice that you would give to them to really get this work started?
Well, I think, I call it the 3 C's. It's you got to collaborate, you got to communicate, and you have to co-create. Um, and in addition to that, I think one of you mentioned letting your ego down. I think, oftentimes we do this work because we love it, but also we take so much pride in it that we don't want to hear the bad stuff, right? But we need to let it go and take in everything, the good and the bad, and figure out what we could do to support and really empathize with our students. So leading with empathy is so important. Sometimes we just need to remind ourselves, what was it like? I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago when you yourself started college. I think we forget because we do it day in, day out. We live in higher ed, we work around higher ed. So yeah, things come naturally to us. So when a student comes to you and says, I don't understand, well, don't go to the other side and say, well, you didn't read or you didn't do this or that. We become so deficit minded, right? But in reality, we're not thinking about, well, what am I not doing to help make this process easier? This is not about hazing. Just because it happened to you doesn't mean it has to happen to everyone. We don't all have to suffer continuously. So really looking at, what are these barriers that we're creating? Like I just told my team the other day, we need to think about this GE certification thing. That's a new barrier that we don't think about. Why do we have students going back to get GE certified when they're already ADT done? So there's a lot of things like they're holding this piece of paper and they're going to a registrar's office and say, hey, I'm GE certified, when this is another thing we need to think about. How do we streamline these processes, right? And so yeah, there's just so many things that we could do at so many levels, and I think we all just have to play.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee. I love the 3 C's and really framing that mindset in, understanding barriers that systems might create. And just passing it over to you, Miss Mancaros, for our last question, very similar question. If you could give one piece of advice to folks on the ground and folks who are really trying to do this work, staff, um, to support transfer work that are starting tomorrow, what piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Lee said it best with the 3 C with 3 C's, but that's definitely a key piece to moving forward. I would say the one piece of advice and something that we here at Dominguez Hills kind of gathered from just meeting and working with Unite LA is that you want to lead with empathy and connection. It's something we all do on top of our other duties, but every conversation can really shape a student's sense of belonging. And I say that in a terms that, like, through this whole process, we realize that, transfer success isn't just a checklist or a new program or a new pilot program. It starts with the relationships you make with those students. So many of our students are first generation, working students, older students, and so they are all sort of navigating that sort of uncertainty or self-doubt that they may have in their experience or their transition experience. And so when they meet someone, who's listening and kind of validates their experiences, that can completely change, how they see themselves at the university. And I think that's something we've kind of ingrained in ourselves as we've been working in this community is, we all have the expertise to create programs and ideas, but really listening into what the students need and where we see their barriers or challenges they may be facing is kind of important to us at this time. And we've seen moving parts. I mean, it's not just looking at their academics, right? We want to kind of ask them questions like, how are they adjusting, right? What's been most challenging for them? And then building off that to build things like having a, student-led organization, or having, our higher ups working towards, better strategic, plans for enrollment and things like that. So it all starts with the conversation and just listening. And I think that's one thing I would say you could take away. So just those small moments of care, and the connection that are what really kind of create that fully transfer receptive culture. One student, one faculty, one frontline person at a time, we can definitely create change just by having those conversations. So yeah. I think I went a little too philosophical, but that's just my own philosophy when it comes to working in these types of environments.
Totally agree, and thank you so much. That I think that's really wonderful to spotlight in terms of a mindset. We have a few minutes now. Just before we get into the activity that we plan for this community of practice, and so I'd love to open it up to the audience. If you'd like to ask any questions of our two amazing panelists, please feel free to either come off mute and ask your question, or share it in the chat and I can read it for you. But thank you again, Dr. Lee and Ms. Mancaros, for sharing all of your wonderful insights on the transfer redesign process. And we'd love to take just a few questions if there are any.
Hi, I have a question just about design thinking for both Dora and Jen. What were your initial sort of reactions to learning about design thinking? I know for me at the time, it was it was a new concept, but I'm curious, like from start to finish, how might your understanding of design thinking changed? And then how might you be, still using design thinking in your everyday work?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
I think for us, I think I kind of came into the sort of conversation a little late in the game, but when I got into the whole process, I think the biggest thing for us when we were thinking about design thinking is how are we going to have future conversations with other key people we wanted within this community to really understand the way it works in the process. I mean, that's the hardest thing at any institution is sort of the buy-in when you're like, here's this idea we have, we want to use this sort of model. And then having all these personalities come into a room and say, we want to do it this way, we want to do it that way. And so finding that sort of collaborative sort of standpoint where we all wrote down kind of the things we're working on and realized, wait a minute, we're all kind of doing the same thing. Why can't we collectively do that together? And so with that sort of design thinking process and model, we were able to kind of hone in on one main, theme out of it, which is building that transfer receptive culture on campus. And by doing that, that sort of created this wave of multiple things. I mean, our EOP now at our campus is now, being part of that community are now accepting transfer students for their program. We have the STARS organization. So things like that kind of transcended where people started seeing like, hey, if we actually work together, things actually can happen. I think that was the one thing is separately, it was harder to make things happen. But when we started working together, using this sort of design thinking, we noticed we were able to get things done, and our pilots up and running. And, we truly started to see that working together is our success here at DH using the design thinking.
I think I went into this with a little bit of, I was a little nervous, especially when we were looking at inviting all of the campus stakeholders. I was like, okay, do they really want to play with us? Are they going to even do this? Do they have the time? I had all this self-doubt, right? And I think that was the most challenging for me, and reaching out to them. But the outcome was amazing. I mean, people were very interested in it. And so it was refreshing to have so many people at the table, and it actually allowed us to pause and really think about the work that we all are doing, right? Contributing, and how can we, like Jennifer said, bring it together and know who to go to when we need to go. We now have, like, I feel at least, the ability to just pick up the phone and call certain partners on campus when we need something, or we're doing a resource fair at a community college and be like, hey, you interested in going? Because they really want to see, the service, at this event. And so I think this even going through the processes allowed us to pause and think, right? And really process the work that we're doing, because we're always just doing and not really thinking. Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspectives, because the systems, the CSU system is working to implement so many different strategies around transfer, and in many cases working with community college partners, and in many cases not working with community college partners. Are you seeing a certain are you seeing utility in this process, in what you've done or what you've created, that can be scaled across the system? Or are you seeing any kind of other learning communities, sharing communities about transfer with the CSU, that kind of similar concepts, or maybe dissimilar concepts come up in that this can be applied to? Jen, you're off mute.
I think through the multiple divisions that we are working with in this sort of pipeline, I would say we don't really, right now, I think we're in a good spot. I think there's a lot of, like I was mentioning earlier, there's a lot of moving parts right now that, just from this learning community that we've kind of created and the initiatives that we've been successful with, now, admissions and outreach and financial aid, all those sort of counterparts are now working with us to how we can make that transfer experience, or that transfer receptive culture, more heightened here. Again, I don't really see any barriers. I think we're just continuously working collaboratively to ensure that we are continuing the momentum. I mean, when we first started with you guys, we were like, I think 65% in retention, I want to say, as far as enrollment and so forth. Now we're at 80.1%. I'm going to put that 0.1% because that's a big jump for us here at Dominguez Hills. And so seeing the sort of numbers and the progress that we've made just in these small sort of increments we've done over the last couple of years, I mean, I really don't see us having any barriers as of right now. I think we're just continuing to work together and make things happen.
I think every school should go through a transfer redesign, or just even a redesign process, because I think this process is, I mean, having gone through it, I think 6 weeks is not enough. I think we should continuously do it. Would love to have, like, Adam and Matt with us forever. But I think we all need to go through something like this before we take any of our ideas out into the world. So I know that there are, like, lots of pockets of amazing transfer work, redesign work, collaboratives. I think there is, like, a huge flow of, like, love for transfer right now. And I think one of the things that we talk about at these different types of collaboratives, work groups, whatever you want to call it, is that we need to just all come together and just have one big conversation. Because I go to all these different work groups and we have very similar conversations, and I feel like the desire is there, but I think, how do we bring everyone together for a large transfer redesign, right? We're talking about California. Maybe we could just start with Southern California. Like, how do we bring the IE together with LA and have that conversation? How do you bring the CSUs and the CCCs together and have that conversation? and even bringing the privates and the UCs together. We now have a common GE. So what's happening with that, right? And there's all these new tools and kits and stuff. I just feel like, there's a lot of love, but there's just not a lot of, I think, again, conversation about how this is being put out there and how it's impacting our students at the end of the day. Here we're all talking, but how is it impacting the students that are our stakeholders?
Appreciate you saying, one, that we should be there more. Matt and I would be happy to. But also the sentiment that there's this is such a popular topic, and it doesn't just run through the CSUs, but it runs through the UCs, the privates, really the way the community colleges approach it versus the CSUs is vastly different, right? So I appreciate your sentiment on getting folks together, on doing it across the IE, doing it across the state. And the nice part with K-16 collaboratives is we have 13 of these across the state in those different areas working towards similar goals, right? Why isn't this a goal, or why can't this be a goal, rather? So we'll take that to heart, and we'll pose it to our colleagues and see what happens. I know we said we had an activity. We really wanted to dive into the empathy interviews with folks. And anytime I think anyone these days says activity on a webinar, people start leaving just because they like to sit and listen versus participate at 10 a.m. I can't blame them. I've been there before. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, my fire alarm's going off. I have to leave real quick. So I think that happened to us to an extent. That said, I know there are still some folks in the room who haven't participated in the community practice or in the transfer redesign, rather. And I think it'd be valuable to go through a bit of the process for empathy interviews. We're not going to do breakout rooms because we might be talking to ourselves, but we'll do maybe one big group, and I'll ask Alex to maybe walk us through a bit of the empathy interview process, how those questions come to be, maybe some of the thinking behind what to do. We can throw out some examples. They can be certainly more informal than we had planned, but would love for the folks that haven't done this before to get a feel for how that goes. So Alex, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Dora and Jennifer, I can't thank you enough for sharing all of these experiences, and also that you just spoke so eloquently to the power of empathy and the importance of empathy, and how and what it means to take ourselves out of our own experiences and put ourselves in the experiences of others to really seek to understand where folks are coming from and what their needs are, and to have those conversations with a lot of openness. And so, yeah, I think that is just the heart. And that is really, you summarized so well what I love so much about this process. And even those of us who speak with students every single day, there's sort of a different process when you're leading with an empathy approach that I think is really novel and important. And the nice thing about this is, when, as Adam mentioned this, and as the student-centered redesign process can be a long process, a lot of work to get people in the room, a lot of work, a number, 14 hours of meeting time plus time spent. The nice thing about empathy interviews, and why we wanted to focus in on this today, is that it's really accessible. It's something that any one of us can do in our jobs at any point with just a little bit of effort. And I think it can be one of the most transformational parts of how we sort of change how we do our jobs. And that makes it, I think, a really exciting tool. And it's pretty intuitive. It's what it sounds like. You're interviewing with a sense of empathy to really understand other folks' experiences. So I'll just run through a few tips, and then I think we can spend a little bit of time talking about where and how you might use this and what questions you might ask. So we can go next. So if we're thinking about how we might improve transfer student success is sort of our broad question, and we want to do empathy interviews around this. We can go to next slide. This is, again, sort of starting at the first phase of the process, but and can live on its own as well. So I'll go next slide. Okay. And we're doing this again to really put the people we're trying to serve at the center of our work, to create more effective solutions, to unlock creativity, and I think to really also align, especially when we're working with other people, to kind of have, we all come at our work with models of students in our heads. I think doing empathy interviews allows folks to sort of build shared references of the students that we're working to serve, which is nice as well. Next slide. Okay. All right, we can go next slide. Get into it. Okay. So standard interviewing, I imagine folks have done interviews before. Often have a strict interview protocol where you need to ask the same questions in the same way. You're asking sort of about students' opinions, about what they think, about their ideas. You're answering sort of very specific questions, and you're kind of testing hypotheses. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest core elements of standard interviewing. Empathy interviewing is much more like a conversation. So you're using a few generalized prompts. You're asking students not about their opinions, but about their emotions and their experiences. You're really working to understand the person holistically, and you're taking a beginner's mindset. You're not sort of making assumptions about how a student might respond or what it is that they might say. You really are kind of starting from a blank slate. I'm going to add actually one other thing, and Jennifer, you reminded me about this, is where these interviews will happen. Oftentimes when we're doing standard interviewing, we are putting a lot of work into reaching out to do recruitment, to identify, to follow up, to schedule time. And, there's a lot of value to that. And it can also mean that you're self-selecting to the students who have the time and who are likely to respond and sort of be willing to say yes and work with you. Whereas empathy interviewing happens much more organically. So Jennifer talking about setting up a table so that you can engage with students who are passing by is a key element of empathy interviewing, because it means you're meeting students where they're at. You're not just getting the folks who have the time or the eagerness to talk with you. You're catching sort of those folks that you might otherwise be missing. And you're doing it in a casual, friendly place, really coming to the students and making yourselves available to students. Okay, the next slide. So as kind of Dora and Jennifer had referred to, this was a key element of the student-centered design process, and the target interviewees were transfer students attending orientation. So we had actually structured these processes to happen during orientations and other campus events to catch students while they're on campus. There was also some effort to find currently enrolled transfer students, sort of student workers in various offices, going and approaching them. And I think interviewees can also be prospective transfer students as well. Okay, and examples are, can you tell me a little bit about your journey from high school to campus? And then maybe asking, why did you decide to transfer? But really starting with a very open question. Another example is, can you tell me about a time when you felt cared for by your school or college and what made you feel that way? So in empathy interview, if you ask for folks to remember and share a past experience, that can kind of allow us to get to more specificity than a more broader question of, what helped, what supported you in this process, or what would be helpful to you, but asking to remember a specific experience that then they can share, which kind of unlocks a deeper understanding. And then similarly, can you tell me about a time when you felt prepared to take on a new challenge and what helped you feel prepared? So not necessarily just asking about the transfer process, because a part of this is understanding what makes someone feel cared for, prepared, ready to take on a new challenge. And then how do you take those learnings into the work that you're doing around transfer or anything else? And here are just some tips and guidance. And it can be a little challenging because we often want to share advice or respond and give answers, especially if students are sharing challenges. And so with empathy interviews, it's really about listening, avoiding corrections or explanations, being present, and just really seeking to absorb information as much as possible. Okay. And then why? Why is the most powerful question in an empathy interview as well. Okay. All right. So what we wanted to do was create an opportunity for you all to kind of prepare and to do empathy interviews relevant to any work that you're doing on campus after this event. So wanted to create a chance to kind of walk through how you might design a few empathy interview questions and how you might approach this. And so what I would actually love to do is invite anyone, particularly folks who haven't been involved in this process yet, to share kind of what's a challenge that you're facing related to transfer and what's a question that you might want to ask students. And we can think about how to frame that in an empathy oriented way. So with that, would anyone like to share?
And we're also limited in folks that haven't participated. So for anyone that wants to, that hasn't, and if you have a new challenge that's cropped up in past months that we can address together, feel free.
What's a transfer related challenge that you're dealing with on campus right now?
Sure, I know you mentioned the new CalGETSI uh requirements coming up, and I know from talking to other partners, it's been a challenge in one changing all of their course guides to match CalGETSI and match the transfer pathways. And in some cases, I'm actually thinking about a private nonprofit that I've worked with. It's been an interesting challenge for them to communicate with their community college partners on or community college students what specifics that their current course catalog has that they have to transfer over without necessarily redoing the whole catalog. Curious from your vantage point, or any of the other folks from Long Beach or UCI on the call, or the DH, of course, have you got any interesting issues with CalGETSI, especially kind of talking to students about what the new transfer requirements are or what the new courses might be in there?
I can't even remember the numbering of the new GE pattern, so we'll start there. I mean, you know, I mean, for me to even ask, like, how do you think this experience is this change is gonna impact you? What are some of your feelings around this new CalGETSI pattern, right? I mean, if I'm feeling nervous about it, I mean, I can't even imagine what in the next couple of years, I don't know, like losing your area E. Does that count? Where is it gonna go? Like, that credit loss feeling, like, or it may just be like, I don't know, just take me in. And then down the line, when you're ready to graduate, you realize that, oh my gosh, I'm on the wrong GE pattern, or like, what year should I declare? Should I go back to my original year or my admitted year? Even I'm feeling nervous about it. So I can't imagine what students are feeling. Or they might not even know about it right now. It'll be a surprise.
Yeah. That's great. There's a lot that pops up for me in terms of what we might ask and sort of how to engage students in that. Does anyone else sort of think of questions that you might want to ask students about CalGETSI? Do they know about it?
I felt like that was the question I was wanted to just basic, like, are they aware, and how are they getting that information? It's not like students are constantly checking our websites
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just posting it on the website. I don't know that that's enough. I mean, unless a student has a specific question, they're not going to go look at your website.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I could imagine, I mean, a question of sort of, have you heard about this? And if it's a yes, where do you last remember hearing about it? And if it's a no, That creates a real opportunity to leverage the kind of general nature of empathy interviewing. Well, rather than asking, well, how could we explain you better about CalGETC? Where should we put this information so you can access it? That kind of places the onus on the student to solve a problem we haven't solved ourselves. And so instead of that, ways to sort of leverage an empathy interview approach might be, so to think about maybe, and it's hard to do off the top of our head always, but this question of, where do they get information? Where are they finding information that's helpful? So if, could ask, where's the last time that when you had a question about your classes or registration, where did you go? And to sort of ask for a very specific example in an analogous situation to understand where did they succeed in finding the information that they needed. And I'd probably put money on they'd say, oh, well, my friend, they'd start with my friend. And then that becomes an interesting question of, okay, if peer networks really are so helpful in explaining information like this, what might it look like to leverage peer networks in an intentional way to design information that travels along peer networks to sort of make sure that students are getting accurate information. And that unlocks a whole other kind of approach that may involve a website, but is very different than sort of what do we put on the website to make sure students agree. And so that is kind of an example of how an empathy interview might help you tackle this question in a different way. Does that spark, or how does that sound to you all?
I'm just kind of wondering about students' transfer experience, transferring from their community college to our campus at the university. Like what Jennifer was saying about connection and belonging. And I'm just, I'm wondering, where have they found that on our campus, or have they had that experience, or do they just feel like they're mixed in with everyone else and there's no real differentiation?
I realized my mic was muted. I wanted to just jump in real quick. So, one of the things or pilot programs we did last spring and now is kind of a full front thing is we started this transfer day. So for our admitted students, we have a transfer day where we kind of celebrate them. You're here, we're excited to have you here. And we get them connected to our student support services. They get to meet some of the faculty in their colleges. It was a way for us to get them prepared, but also just have that sense of, you know what, DH is the right place for me. And we see in the surveys that we get that students feel like I made the right choice. I feel like I know who to go to when I need this service or this service. Um, and so by doing that, we've noticed that students ask more questions. Even at the tables that I have sometimes outside on the walkway, they always said, like, thank you for that transfer day, because if you had have talked about this service, I wouldn't have known I had this accommodation for myself. And it gives them that confidence and that motivation to reach out and ask more questions. I think I know it's different at every CSU, but for us, that has really shined some light on different ways we can engage them right from their starting point of that transition. Again, they always come in with that uncertainty of, who's here to support me. We get them right when they're admitted and say, hey, we're going to be your cheerleaders all the way to graduation. Here's some key people, key things you should know that are here for you to be successful, not just on the academic front, but also on their personal and professional sort of development. I think that's something we've kind of targeted with our vision, and we've definitely seen some success there.
It's really exciting to hear. Thank you for sharing, Jennifer. I love that also that kind of creating opportunity. creating a sense of belonging sort of leads to folks asking more questions, and sort of creating that opportunity and that focus creates, sort of a two-way dialogue further as well. So it's fantastic.
Well, no, we're coming up on time, so I'll say I appreciate Alex, you kind of walking us through what it looks like for a student more so than what it looks like for someone within the system, and how we can reframe the way that we think about it, how we can hear about what you're doing at DHN to really celebrate those students, and ensure that their perspectives are known, but also like you're building, I mean, you're literally building days and organizations around them, which is huge. And I think the empathy factor is not only necessary as we see, but as your numbers tell, I mean, it yields success for students. So appreciate you sharing that, and appreciate Alex you walking us through that. I know that we want to be able to continue doing more work on transfer redesign. Transfer redesign has been such a critical part of the K-16 work and Adelaide's work over the years. We're really happy with this report that Wes said collaborated on with us on to really detail the process. I just put that in the chat for you, so please feel free to take a look if you haven't already seen it. Thank you so much to Jen and Dora for not just going through the process, and of course we have Claire and Tatiana from Pomona who have also gone through the process with Dora. Thank you all for doing that with us and for keeping the work up. I mean, it's critical, and we're excited to see how it continues to grow. I love hearing about what continuing to happen on the ground. Matt was just telling me the other day that it makes him cry whenever he hears about a success story. So we want to keep that up. But thank you all for joining today and hearing about it. And Colleen, if you are interested in going through the process, like, let us know. We have K-16 opportunity to do it.
Yeah, I will be bringing it back. We have a monthly transfer success a team with our local community college. So I'll be bringing it back to the group and see what they think.
Wonderful. Let us know. All right. Well, then in the meantime, have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we'll see y'all later.